the new
Yes, sir.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Maitland City Council meeting of July 10th, 2023. You really take a moment to silence any phones. And we have a new procedure with speaker cards. So if anybody wishes to speak during the public period, if you fill out a speaker card, please, just let us know who you are. It helps us to keep records and to move things along more expeditiously for everybody. If you would please join me, we'll start the meeting with a moment of silence. Okay, thank you. If you're willing and able, would you please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance?
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Mr. City Manager, any old business?
No, sir.
Okay. Consent agenda. Does anybody on council wish to remove any item from the consent agenda? Seeing none, does anybody from the public have any comments on consent agenda items 2 or 3? Seeing none, let's close the public period, and motion would be in order.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
We have a motion
I will second.
and a second. Mary, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Guthrie,
Aye.
Councilmember Paul Harrison,
Aye.
Councilmember Wurzel,
Aye.
Councilmember Wild,
Aye.
Mayor Lance.
Aye. Okay, we have adopted the consent agenda. We're on to the public period, which is the time when anybody can address us on any item that's not on the agenda. And we have a couple of speaker cards up here, so I'll start with these. Stephen Hampton. Please come to the microphone. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, is your green button on there?
The green button is on.
Good.
Just wanted to bring up some things that I've noticed. I live over in Greenwood Gardens, which is just to the north of here, over by the Maitland train station, and was exercising the other day, walking over the pedestrian bridge that goes over to the community park, and noticed that there is more vagrancy taking place underneath the overpass that Maitland Boulevard takes to go to 1792. There's several tents there. There's some canopies now, and what appears to be like lawn chairs and tables, and apparently people have setting themselves up as a community. And I've also noticed this is in addition to sometimes when I go around Lake Lily, there are vagrants, people with shopping carts and things that are hanging out in the park. There's also, everybody knows about the guy that used to live in my neighborhood who hangs out now behind 7-Eleven. And I just noticed that this is a trend that is continuing to rise. And I was just out in Los Angeles last month, and they literally have tent cities that have grown up around their city hall. And they actually have places barricaded off just for those cities. And it's no joke. They're making accommodations for those people. And in the beginning, in Los Angeles and San Francisco, they didn't do anything about it. They just accepted it and left it. And I'm hoping that Maitland doesn't start becoming one of those communities that people who are homeless that are sort of know to come to our community because we won't do anything about it, or they're welcome. I have to caution my 2 young children now about being outside and seeing people that they don't know, whereas I didn't used to have to do that 4 or 5 years ago. So I just want to bring that to the attention of the council. I know we've spoken, myself and some of my other neighbors have spoken to the police about it. I don't know if there's a plan in place to start addressing that or do anything about it, but clearly they haven't done anything about what's there now. And again, I haven't noticed anything malicious. However, that's what sort of starts that is 1, 2, 3, 10. Now we have a city that's going up, a tent city that's sort of going up. So I want to bring that to the council's attention and wanted to ask you guys if that was something that you knew about, or if there's a plan in place to address that, because I don't think I should be silent about it anymore. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hampton. And we'll address it all together after the public hearing. Ms. Arella Smith, I got that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good evening. I know Steve personally in my neighborhood, and I live on 960 Gamewell Avenue. My husband was here for the City Council of June 16, expressed the same concern of the homelessness that's happening here. I spoke to, let me piggyback. We have spoken, as he mentioned, we have called the Maitland Police Department. It is a non-emergency, but the problem is that some of the homeless individuals are becoming a little hostile. On the way here, there was 3 of them, and I can pinpoint where they are. I've taken pictures. Every time I put it on your website on Inspire Maitland, I do get a nice courtesy email back, and I do appreciate that you guys are really thorough and respond within less than 24 hours. But again, we've called plenty of times, and a lot of times it's just there's nothing we can do. I understand it's a public situation, public property, they can't, but in some instances, it is private. There's one individual that just lays down in everybody's lawn and keeps going, and it's okay. He is known on a first name basis by the police department, because I think we all know the officers at Greenwood Gardens. What I want to know is exactly what my neighbor is asking. It's been brought up, the police department knows about it. Some, I have to say, there's 2 individuals that are hostile. There's one that loves to hang out at the Maitland Library, and the other one by the Wells Fargo. And that one has a cell phone, which it dawns me, like, I don't know how you have a cell phone, but very hostile. If you're near them, forget about it. But again, the concern for the children, I have a soon-to-be 10-year-old, and one of them went like that to him, and that's on the bridge, going from my home to the Maitland Community Park. This is getting to where now it's like, if they're doing what they're doing, they might get it to mind their business, but I think as a city, we're not helping it. I did speak to one of the councils that I know personally, Winter Park, City of Winter Park. They do have an ordinance, and their ordinance is you can't be sleeping on a bench. That's why I didn't know this. The bench is divided, so the bench is divided for a reason, so there's not enough room for them to sleep on. But my thing is there has to be an ordinance that does not allow people to sleep on benches on any public property or camp out. So that's my thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Smith. All right. These are all the cards we have. Everybody else would like to step up and fill out a card as you.
I am still announced back. Though I was joking with the Chief Manuel that I should just go mimeograph a bunch of them, so I'll read one out my name and address in the library. I am Stacy Larson. I'm the director of the Maitland Public Library. We are now just slightly halfway through our summer reading program. So if you have not started, it's not too late. You can still get in on the great fun we are having. This Wednesday night, we're going to have an artist reception for Rob Davis, who is our Artist of the Month. Then on Thursday at 2 o'clock, our favorite presenter, Professor Doodad, will be here, and he is going to be doing an air science lab. So all things that fly and how they fly. So that one is, he's such a good presenter, and we just love having him. So he'll be here this week. We hope that you will bring your young people to that one. The Enola Holmes Escape Room is back. We have 2 more sets of dates and times. If you have not done it already, you can still do it. Wednesday, July 19th, or Wednesday, July 26th. I believe sessions are at 4, 4:45, 5:30, and 6:15. So you can get there in the afternoon or just after work. There are slots available on each day. The Enola Holmes Book Club will be coming back for its second session on July 19th. So I know that the kids had a great time at the last session and asked for a second session, so we'll be talking about book 2 this time around. You can get all of the information about our events on our calendar at maitlandpubliclibrary.org. I also want to encourage you to sign up for Beanstack. You can do that through our website. That is our tracking system for kids from birth through 18. It's reading by minutes, and every 200 minutes you read, you get prizes. For the grown-ups, it's a bingo card. So when you get one bingo, you get a prize. If you complete the whole bingo board, you will get the grand prizes. So everybody is eligible from birth to death, and everybody should sign up on Beanstack through the library website. If you have questions, I'm always happy to answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stacy. Is anybody else? Yes.
Hi, my name is Jenny Reeder. I live at Huntington Court. I also just wanted to say ditto to Aurelis and Steve and everything that they shared about the issue about the vagrancy and loitering around our community. It's really alarming to me too. You know, just I like to walk. I walk by myself around the city, around our beautiful city, and it's, you know, I'll turn a corner to go up the hill to the park, and there's someone laying in the bushes there. You know, and then I turn the corner. Also, I wanted to add, the Hill Walkthrough Park is kind of an opportunity now that we have a sidewalk going along Greenwood Road. It leads from Maitland Avenue to the bike trail, and which is a good thing. We can also bring traffic through there that can recognize this area of woods that is very inviting maybe to someone who wants to start camping out or sleeping. We've had a lot of that. The police are great about coming and checking everything out. So we were wondering also about getting that cleaned up so that you can see straight through to the wall, so that it's not such a mess. I do know that there are people who come and they sleep during the day. They park along that road, and you know, apparently there's no law against that, but they go back in the bushes and, you know, we just don't know. It's just, it doesn't feel right to someone who lives in that community and has kids. So that's another issue. So I just wanted to also just ditto those comments, all of those comments. It's alarming to me. And wanted to know about ordinances and vagrancy laws, vagrancy and loitering ordinances that we need to maybe, you know, modernize or create. I don't know. But it's something, I know that we want to have a healthy community for our kids and for all of us to enjoy. And it's, you know, it benefits us. It doesn't benefit the person who is loitering or is vagrant as well. So it's good, a win-win for everybody. If we pay attention to this and actually deal with it instead of ignoring it and saying, oh, we feel bad. Because that's a given, of course. We know we all, you know, we have compassion. So I don't know if I have any more time, but I have one more thing about the wall at Hill Walkthrough Park. When they created Maitland Boulevard, they were supposed to raise the wall because there was nothing behind the wall. I'm out of time. So.
No, you got to go till it gets to red.
So I'm wondering, it might be a Department of Transportation issue. I'm not sure, but I thought that I had heard that there was some money for Greenwood Gardens, and that was one of the things they were going to do was raise the wall. There's a lot of traffic, on Maitland Boulevard, and so if the wall were higher, and it's very outdated, it's a very old wall, and so if it were higher, there would be less, noise and for music and everything else, traffic and speed bumps that they created to, just that our neighborhood can really hear. I have one more thing, but it's real short. Can I say?
Go till it's ready.
All right. So this is, we in that neighborhood also, or we seem very troubled there, don't we? But we are having trouble getting out of our neighborhood traffic-wise. And I know this is something that you all struggle with and are probably working on, but going out on Maitland Avenue in the afternoon, and trying to just get out, with the light will turn, but then everybody's in line and you just can't move. So I noticed that everyone comes from Horatio, from the east, Horatio. If there were more signage with a big sign saying to Maitland Boulevard, they would take a right. They'd only have 2 lights to deal with, I think, and they could get right in 3 lanes, and they could get right on Maitland Boulevard. But instead, people are just habit, if they go over 1792, they go down, they take a right on Maitland Avenue over the railroad tracks, that little tiny street, and then they turn right on Maitland Avenue and face 3 lights, and then 2 left turn lanes, and it would benefit them and also the traffic. I think if there were just some signage saying to Maitland Boulevard, not, instead of them, just going straight ahead, not, just out of habit. So that was a suggestion. There is a sign, but it's not very big. So just, all right, that's it.
Ms. Reader. Is anybody else?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Patterson. I have 3 homes in Greenwood Gardens. I'm also concerned about the homeless camp. There was one down by the Maitland Masterfield Masters Academy for quite some time. There was a camp of homeless people in there. And it's my understanding they moved under the overpass closer to our neighborhood. And then we have a young man, I'm sorry I was late, but in our neighborhood who's displaced out of his home, who obviously has some mental health problems, is living out of his wagon with a blow-up air mattress laying on the lawns at office building and then at the condos at Robin Hood Villas. I'm a mental health counselor. He needs some help of some sort. I actually spoke with the police today to see can we get this man some help. He's sitting in the rain. And it's not a good thing for our neighborhood. We have a lot of children in our neighborhood that come down the street on their scooters and they like to go to 7-Eleven, get a snack. The state of Florida has the highest rate of human trafficking in the nation. And so having people in our neighborhood, we do not know who they are. We do not know what they are doing. We have a lot of children in our neighborhood that need the freedom that belong to taxpayers that would like to use the streets and the parks and be able to be outside. And I personally have had knowledge of a person who was brutalized by someone out of a homeless camp. And the police confirmed today that last week there was another episode of that over on Lahachie where a woman was raped and brutalized by someone out of a homeless camp. So last night at about 10 o'clock I was in my kitchen, cleaning my kitchen, and someone knocked at my back door. And my dogs were going insane, and I'm like, I had my curtains pulled, and I was like, okay, why is someone in my backyard? So I didn't call the police. My daughter and her husband came over because they live across the street, but it's like, yeah, we don't need that. And so I also support modernizing the vagrancy laws, the trespassing on private property, DOT property. The police, their hands are tied if they don't commit a crime, but it would be so sad to wait until they do commit a crime. And I would like to see us really get, this is not something we've had in our community in Maitland. It's been very safe. In fact, I rented a property. A woman from Atlanta told me she had done the check on the neighborhood for crime, and it was the safest neighborhood in the state of Florida. And so we have a lot of people dumping into our society right now that don't have homes, they don't have jobs, they don't have a place to be, and that is a horrible situation. But we have resources for people in our community. We have the Coalition for the Homeless, we have transitional housing, we have a lot of resources. But if people don't want to use the resources, then is it, I mean, can they just come sit in our, like, camp out on our front yard? So you know, I felt like the police were like, there's nothing we can do unless they commit a crime and unless they come in your yard. So I have 2 condos to Robin Hood Villas, but not Robin Hood Villas 1, which is where the young man is, you know, sleeping or laying or has his stuff. And so I spent 2 hours last week trying to find resources for that young man and couldn't find any. But we'd like to see our commissioners, our community step up to the plate and protect our children and protect our homes. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Patterson. Anybody else like to take advantage of the public period? Okay, seeing none, let's close the public period. And I would, if we could address this issue of homeless around and what we're doing about it, and we've talked, I'm sure we've all talked with the city manager and the police chief about these things. Mr. Brigantine, can you
Sure.
update us on where we are?
Yeah, just briefly, yeah, we are aware of as a city, the police department's received a number of calls, as have you, calls and emails, as have I, regarding the issue of the unhoused in Maitland. The police department advisor, legal advisor, has prepared an ordinance that just went through Cliff's legal review, and it's just back in my office, so that will be scheduled most likely for the next city council meeting to provide the police department some additional tools to deal with this. Primarily dealing with public property. Private property is a different matter. If there's someone that's unwanted on private property, that property owner always has the right to contact the police department and have that person escorted off the property and trespassed. If they show back up again, then the next steps are taken. So in the conversations I've had with private property owners, they seem to be not aware of that right. They seem to think that they didn't have the ability to ask people to leave their property, and if they didn't, that they couldn't call the police. I've made them aware of that, as has the chief. So we can get some information out about that, but private property owners do have rights as well. And so, and we're looking at it from the public standpoint, from public property, and so that ordinance will be coming forward to provide the police department, the officers, some additional tools in dealing with the issue.
Okay, so we're expecting to see the draft ordinance at our next meeting.
Yes, sir.
Public property, which is something we don't have up until now. So that is something we're aware of, and we've been listening, we've been hearing from people in the neighborhoods, and so we're at our next meeting. We'll take that up and then begin the process.
Mr. Mayor, just for
Yes.
clarification, if it would not be too inappropriate, since we do have so many residents from Greenwood Gardens here, if city manager could comment on the Hill Passive Park and the specifics of what we can actually do and cannot do, because we have had conversations about clearing out the underbrush and what we are able to do. So just to clarify for the residents who don't, just so they don't think that we're not doing anything.
Yeah. The as far as Hill Passive Park goes, that was dedicated as a natural area, as a forest. I have requests from individuals, I'm assuming they're from the neighborhood, that they wanted that chopped down. That was left there to provide a buffer to Maitland Boulevard, so we can clear out some of the underbrush and clear it out, make sure there's a clear walking paths in there. We actually have some money in the capital budget, I believe, next year to make some improvements to that park, but cutting it down is really not an option because it was dedicated as a buffer, and I'm not sure everybody in the neighborhood would be happy if we took that little forest down and they would have a direct view to Maitland Boulevard.
But you can clear out
Sure.
underbrush and
Yeah,
things like that. So, and I think there's a question about the raising of the wall. I assume that means the wall that was there, the sound wall that separates the slip ramp from the neighborhood there.
I'm never aware of any project like that.
Yeah, I've not heard that either. But we can take that up afterwards if necessary. So, okay. Well, I appreciate you all coming out and giving us your views on that, and we'll be moving it ahead at the next council meeting. Let's move on to decisions, and the first decision item is an amendment to section 8.04 of the city charter. And Cliff, you're going to do a guest reading of the ordinance title?
I am. Ordinance number 1419, read by title only, an ordinance of the city of Maitland, Florida, amending section 8.04, excuse me, qualifications of candidate, form of oath of the charter of the city of Maitland by modifying the qualification period for candidates in the 2024 general municipal election, and in each subsequent year that is a multiple of 4 to a period that is in harmony with the date of the Florida presidential preference primary set by Florida statute, providing for severability, providing for conflict, providing for codification, providing for an effective date.
Okay. Thank you.
That's as slow as I can do it.
Mark, would you like to introduce the item?
Sure, I'd be happy to. As the staff report says, back in October of 2011, an ordinance was adopted that modified section 804 of the city charter, providing dates for when elections during presidential primary years would take place, thinking based upon the election laws at that time, those would suffice to meet it. As we all know, there have been significant changes to the election laws over the years, and those dates just don't work. During the presidential primary, the supervisor of election looks at the schedule that works best for the entire county and establishes that schedule. Under our charter, we would not be able to meet those time frames. So what we are suggesting is that we adopt this ordinance that will amend the charter. As you've seen from Cliff's legal opinion that's attached to this, 2 sections of the Florida statutes and an AGO opinion provide authority to allow us to amend the charter in a very specific circumstance like this to accommodate elections during the presidential preference primary. So that's what we are suggesting, is that ordinance be struck and new language be struck and new language be included to require coordination with the supervisor of elections every 4th year for the presidential primary. The result of that would be for this coming election that candidate addition submittal would happen the week of November 13th, and candidate qualifying would happen the week of November 27th. So if you have any questions, be happy to answer them. If not, staff would recommend introducing the ordinance, amending section 804 of the city charter, and setting a public hearing date for July 24th, 2023.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Any questions of Mark on this? No? All right, we'll open it up to public comment. Does anybody from the public have any comment on this item?
Dale McDowell, one-way to Angela Court. I think it's a great idea. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Anybody else? No? Okay. Okay, let's close the public period, and there's no further discussion. The motion will be in order.
Make a motion to move to introduce an ordinance amending section 8.04 of the city charter and setting the public hearing date for July 24th, 2023.
All right. Motion.
I second.
And a second. Mary, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Harrison.
Aye.
Councilmember Worcel.
Aye.
Councilmember Wild.
Aye.
Councilmember Guthrie.
Aye.
Mayor Lambert.
Aye. Okay. Set the date. Our next item is a request for appeal of 140 Minnehaha Circle waterfront structure permit. Dan, would you like to walk us through this?
Certainly. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So I've got 2 waterfront structure appeals for you tonight. The first one is waterfront structure permit 45872, which was a boat dock constructed back in 2006. The applicant is desiring to replace it in the same footprint as it is deemed damaged by the applicant. Currently, it does not meet the 10-foot required setback. It's actually 6.5 feet on the north side and 8.7 feet on the south side. So the application was denied, and the applicant is here to appeal pursuant to section 2.53 of the ordinance. The boat dock is on Lake Minnehaha, and it is not out of character with the area. We did send out letters to all residents within the immediate area, within either side, and we got 2 letters of support on this one to allow it to be rebuilt in the same place. So that's all I have for this. The decision is at the discretion of council, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions of Dan?
I do, and I guess more for just to, I've spoken to Mark about this just to answer some questions, but in terms of the setback, this one is the setback, and so that's essentially the width of the dock, is that right?
Correct. Yeah, the dock has to be within, according to the ordinance, 10 feet from the property lines, and this is a pie-shaped lot, so it makes it a little bit more difficult to reach that to build it back as it was.
And so and it's clear, I guess, in the appeal documents as well, and like you're implying that the width of the dock, they don't intend to make more than what currently is. It's just that they were grandmothered in under the prior, before there was an ordinance like this.
Correct. Their intent is just to build it back in the exact same footprint.
Yes, I did. And also, one of my questions to Mark was just about, like, what does this affect? Essentially, like, why do we have this rule, and how would it matter? And my understanding is, in this particular case, it would be how close the dock might get to the adjacent property owners, which are the 2 individuals that have signed letters of support in this case, and that it really wouldn't affect, like, the lake, the quality of the lake, the environment, the aesthetics of people who enjoy the lake, anything like that. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Hey Dan, if they looks like a boat lift there, then they have a T on the end of it. So if they didn't have that T on the end of it and rebuilt it, might just fit in even without with the setbacks, wouldn't it?
If they were to reconstruct it and move the boat lift over, correct. Right now, it's non-conforming on both sides.
Yeah, but I'm saying there's a T,
it.
what we call a T right there. It comes up and then kind of stands out left. So I'm sure that's about probably 6 or 8 feet right there.
Correct.
And then I'm sure it's a 3-foot walkway out. So they could really redesign it and have it fit in those parameters.
I'm not sure if they've attempted to redesign it, but it's possible.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions, Dan? Okay, let's open it up to the public comment on this item. Does anybody in the public have anything to say about this topic?
Hi, I'm Sheila Sicker, Streamline Permitting. I represent the property owners and the builder. The problem with the ordinance is that it doesn't allow for complete replacement, repair replacement. There's grandfather rules in everybody's ordinance, in every municipality. It usually is a 100% repair and replace. If the hurricane takes your boathouse, you can build it back in the same location. But the way the Maitland's ordinance is written, you need to replace more than 50% of the value or the square footage of the structure, you have to comply. And so, I mean, technically, the best thing to do for the lake, she was asking about what's good for the lake. The best thing to do for the lake is rebuild it the exact same footprint. Because if you're just taking the pilings out and putting them back in the same hole, you're not working in a different part of the lake. So environmentally, rebuilding it the same footprint is the best thing for the lake. That boathouse has been there for decades, and they've been using it as a boathouse. The boat slip area is a little deeper than anywhere else in that along the shoreline, because boats been coming in and out, and it just kind of naturally hollows it out a little bit. So again, tearing everything down and making it the structure narrower so that it does fit within the setbacks is not the best thing for the environment. It also takes away their right to have a deck. They don't have any space out there they can walk beside the boat, but there's no place to sit out there. There's no place to get your gear, laid out when you're getting ready to go out on the boat. So you would be taking away something from them that they've had for, again, decades, ever since they bought the property. So that's why we were unwilling to, redesign it to fit.
Okay.
Like you had a question.
Well, I mean, I kind of didn't know this is public comment technically, but I had spoken to Mark and briefly to Dan today. I understand that it's represented in the appeal letter that we have that there was hurricane damage. I don't have any evidence of that in terms of how much damage was done. My understanding was that some city staff had gone to look at it. It wasn't certainly decimated or noticeably damaged. I don't doubt that there has been damage as represented. So I certainly would agree with the sentiment regardless of what the ordinance says, but I'm not sure if there is anything that I'm missing in terms of the evidence of the damage.
Well, in order to keep any part of the structure, like the only thing you can do, and I've been in marine construction for 28 years because I was married to a dock builder, but the only thing that they could do is keep all of the pilings and take all of the framing and the decking and the roof structure, just take everything away except the pilings. And you could keep the pilings, but that still doesn't comply with the repair. The repair replace permit says you can't take away more than 50%. And the roof has to be replaced, and the deck framing, a lot of it has to be replaced because when they pulled up the decking, the deck framing ends up being rotted. I mean, anything that's 20 years old, you can't fix. It's just, it costs more to repair it than it does to take it out completely.
So help me understand how it's a 2006 construction job. So I'm taking it that the pilings aren't creosote, so explain to me how it would be not environmental if you took those out and moved those poles around. How does that affect the waterway?
It's just more turbidity. You're stirring up the lake bottom. If they blow out the pilings, get them out of there, remove them, and then set the pilings in a different place, you're just stirring up different areas of the lake because you have the holes where you took the pilings out and then the holes where you put them in. Okay. But I think a bigger deal is really that's where the boat slip is. That's where the boat slip has been, for so long. It's the only place where there's enough water at this length because this dock is really short.
Okay. Could we get your name again? I'm not sure that we have a speaker card for this.
I didn't think, usually I don't have to write one when I'm the applicant, but it's Sheila Sikra, Streamline Permitting.
Oh, so okay, we have it somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. No, unless you have something? No. Okay. Maybe, since we're in the public comment period, anybody else have public comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dale McDonald, 08 Angelo Court, and those of you that know, I'm a veteran of the old Board of Zoning Adjustment. We've had to face these questions multiple times over the years, and I certainly understand. We're establishing precedents here. There's going to be plenty, already has, and will be more redevelopment of Maitland Lakefront. And we're telling anybody that comes along effectively that 6 feet is enough for a setback. And that's not acceptable because we are establishing precedents. So the opportunity to accommodate particular applicants, I don't have a whole lot of sympathy. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Anybody else?
I guess I'm going to speak to this. Jennifer Patterson, 655 Gable Avenue. We owned a home on Lake Maitland on the canal for many, many years, and we paid very high property taxes for that privilege to the community. Being able to vote and enjoy your home is a big part of being a waterfront owner on
our lakes in Winter Park and Maitland. I personally feel like new construction, hold a line on your 10-foot setback, but for people who have lived in their home for 20 years, bought a home with a dock, they're trying to replace within the footprint of what they already have. They're not asking for more than what they have. I wholeheartedly support meeting the needs of our waterfront property owners who pay massive property taxes in our communities, which help support our infrastructure. And so it may be precedence, but if the dock's already been sitting there, why not let the people have the dock? I mean, you're going to have to dredge the lake to make room for the boat to come in, which is very hard on the fish, the plant life, and the lake quality itself. And so I think, we're in this society where the rules are working against the citizens somewhat sometimes. And so I would say consider carefully, because people are only asking for what they have. And having built a dock on the canal off Lake Maitland, the pilings rot. And they rot at the water line. And it doesn't matter how you treat them. And to build a brand new dock on old pilings would be foolish, because they rot. It's water. And so I just think life is hard enough for people right now. And so I would be in full support of letting the people put their dock back right where it sits. So that's my thought.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Patterson.
Do you mind if I just,
Well,
sorry, I just meant to.
If you had your time,
Oh, okay.
so you can submit it to the clerk if you like.
Well, you have copies of these, the neighbors are both up for it.
Yeah, right. Yes. Thank you. Yes. And I think what you're referring to is the neighbor's endorsement on either side, right? Anybody else? Any public comment this evening? So now let's close the public comments period and discussion returns to council. Anybody have thoughts or a motion?
Mayor?
Mike, of course.
Just before anybody makes a motion or votes, if there's any ex-party this is quasi-judicial, so if there's any ex-party communication to disclose, you need to say who you spoke to, the nature of the communication, so everybody's on the record with that. If you received any emails or anything like that, that needs to be made a part of the record as well. If nobody's done any of that, then proceed.
Okay. Everybody understand council's admonition there? All right. I didn't get anything other than what we got in the agenda package, including those letters that you referenced.
Same in discussion with Mark, city manager.
Okay.
If that counts.
It counts for something, but that's not.
I think we got concurrence, it doesn't count, right? You feel low. So my question to Dan was, under the current code, does it matter whether it was or was not storm damaged? In this instance, is it just because if it was storm damage and you were repairing 50%, and if it was just general fall out of repair, general maintenance, does it matter?
Yeah, it's all the same. It's just you have the 50% of the repair.
So the classification of the storm damage doesn't matter. And there is a little bit here when we're talking about property lines. There are property lines in the water, which is sort of, it's an interesting the way we draw them out, because it's drawing to the middle of the lake. And so depending on how that pie kind of flares out, where that is, so.
So from my perspective, and part of why I asked about the storm, the hurricane damage and everything, there's two things. One, we have a law, and so if the law is unfair, that's a different issue, but that's not what we're here to talk about today, and I have no opinion on that at this point. I don't know enough to have an opinion on that, but we have to follow what the law is, A. B, from my understanding, one of the, from talking to Mark, to clarify, is that unlike some of our other variances that come before us, where we have a recommendation from one of our advisory boards and from city staff to help guide us, and generally I let those guide me a lot because they know a whole lot more than me about these things. In this case, this ordinance appears to leave it completely to our discretion, and I asked, there are no criteria listed that we're supposed to consider. So I thought that perhaps storm damage or things could be like mitigation, essentially, that I could consider. I'm also thinking, because we have two of these on, and not to put cart before the horse, but I do think they're different, and so that's part of what I'm looking at too. I do think that ultimately, if we have to, I think we set precedent. Mr. McDonald's right in the sense of it's not binding precedent necessarily, but it certainly could encourage other questions and applications in the future, and that's something to think about. And I think it's a commonplace thing to have rules, even like I think of ADA disability, where once you start building again, you have to follow them regardless of what you got to do before. And these are all, I know the one before us is a newer homeowner that they purchased this property in the last couple of years. So that being said, in this particular one, based on everything I see and everything I've heard and everything I've read, and including, I find particularly helpful, the two adjacent neighbors who have given their support, that it would be their property. Also, I was told by Mark that anybody within a 100-foot radius is contacted, so not just the adjacent property owners, to at least give an opportunity to dissent, and no one did. And based on the fact that we're talking about the width of it, it appears that it would really affect your ability to enjoy your deck. If we're talking 4 to 6 feet, I mean, that's substantial. Given all of those factors, those are all things I'm considering, and I just wanted to be clear.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else?
I was just wondering, and I guess conversation for Dan, I mean, Lori just hit on something there that, there's no criteria of what would be acceptable, because you look at the slot and, it kind of goes like this, it goes real sharp. Is this something like, and it is, I mean, we have rules and regulations for a reason, but those can be amended. Is this a discussion piece maybe we set with planning and zoning and them to look at it and say, if you get approval of both neighbors or all the neighbors in a 100-foot area, and bam, 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 then that will, construed as a variance.
It's absolutely at the discretion of council. If you would like to direct staff to bring back an ordinance to look at different criteria for these, we'll be happy to do so.
Thank you.
I think the question is, that I would be more, is the reconstruction element of it, are we unique in 50%? I know we've talked about this in the jurisdiction of other properties and code compliance, and in docks. Are things like docks that maybe require more maintenance that may trigger that 50% level more frequently? Are we unique in that or not?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
50% tends to be a cliff. In the communities you work with, as far as non-conforming structures, 50% is very
low as
common.
50%. In some communities, it's significantly higher, but it's as low as 50%.
Yeah.
I have another Cliff question. Cliff, the fact that this has a appeal mechanism to council in the ordinance, is that required, or can I read something into the intent, the legislative intent, to allow it to be appealed to council?
Oh, no, it is not. It is required for them to take the next step, which is to go to court, because we have a procedure, but we don't have to have that procedure. It could have been a denial and forced them to go straight to court. And I think I was here when the section was added, and the reason was, before we got to that, but you wouldn't possibly know, but the mayor may remember, is that the reason I became the city attorney is over the dock case. That was going back to 1998. And so we had to rewrite our whole dock structure, all that, the waterfront structure, permitting stuff, to to try to resolve issues like dealing with littoral rights, riparian rights, access to the water. In that case, it was Lake Jackson, which has a right angle corner, and one dock owner was interfering with the rights of another. And so, in that regard, the council decided at that time, God, I can't remember what I had for lunch, but I remember this. And that is that you had wanted to not have them to go to court, rather than have them go to court. You wanted them to be able to come from a staff decision here, so y'all could weigh in as policymakers if there was a criteria, but we didn't have the criteria. So that's where it came in. What I've been looking through the code for is variance requirements. Ordinarily, when you're talking about setback, this is what this is about. You would have to go through a variance process. It would have specific standards, and you have to meet all of them, or you don't get it. And one of them is hardship. And so, in the absence of something, I mean, you do have set standards here for those things, but I can't see that it specifically applies. That's what I was trying to look at, see if it specifically applies here. But you know, you had mentioned things that you're considering. Well, maybe this is a hardship. I don't know, because of the pie-shaped lot. That's something y'all would have to determine. But there aren't really other criterion other than the interference with riparian or littoral rights of a property owner, like that we had in the Olson case way back then.
Because I don't mean to over-lawyer it, but just wanting to follow the law. I didn't know if it's like we're supposed to consider facts, you know, or if it's like we're just reviewing the record, so to speak, and it either fits the law or it doesn't, you know, what our role is in that sense. But I think you're answering that question.
Well, there was an intentional ability to make decisions based on facts presented. Because again, if you go back to the history of where this came from, right angle, dock owner, they can't both be doing that. And so, but if you just issue the permit, well, this guy has waterfront, that one has waterfront, they should have both been, but one got there first, and that messed up the other one. And so, no one was considering, well, what, does that interfere with a riparian right? Does that interfere with a, so that's why that's there. That is a consideration, but no one's, in this case, complaining about that specific issue. And that's why you submit to the neighbors, hey, does this block your view? Does this keep you from the ability to take a boat out into the water from your property? And I think the answer to that is no. But your question, which is more to the point of what is going on with this variance when you have a setback, you're right. Once something is typically taken down that is non-compliant, that would be a non-compliant structure if it's already in violation of setback, no matter how long it's been there. The general rule is you don't get to build it back unless you comply with the current law, absent of variance.
Very helpful, thank you.
So that actually dovetails into my question. How was this constructed in 2006? Has there been a change in the setback? Is that, or was the, what is the nature of how that got done?
I don't know. I'd have to research that.
That was probably pre-Garfinkel, wouldn't you guess, Cliff?
2006 was not pre-Garfinkel. Garfinkel was 1998. That was my very first case.
Okay.
So I guess your question is the bill non-conformance to begin with?
Right, how did it, if it were, we're asked to put this on the same footprint, which is violating the setback, but it's the exact same footprint, well, how did it get there in 2006? Have we moved the setback? Or was the pie shape different? Have they deeded part of the land over to their neighbors? Or, I mean, there has to be an explanation.
Was it permitted?
Or was it permitted? And in that case, are we going to give an exception to someone who didn't follow the rules in the first place? It's a, I mean, I just have a question.
I don't have the answer to that on me tonight. Sorry.
Honestly, that's kind of important to me at this point.
Yeah, so either we changed the rules, or it was built non-compliance, or it got a variance at the time. But we don't have that fact.
So if it was legally non-conforming, meaning it was legal at some point, we changed the rule, and then it became non-conforming, then that's a different issue.
It is a different issue, and typically, then, you know, even when it becomes non-conforming because of a change in the code, we have build-back provisions. We just went through that with that auto dealership down the road. They didn't like what the build-back provisions were, but if they had been damaged anything less than, I think it was 50%, they could build it back, and even if it didn't comply, they could do that. And so here, I don't know what the facts are about how this permit specifically was issued, but I do know that if it was in compliance and we made it non-compliant, then there should be, to comply with constitutional requirements, the ability to build back up to a certain point. I don't even know whether this is storm damage or whether it got old, because there's this other part that sometimes happens, which is ongoing maintenance, right? And so if you take out 5 boards and put 5 boards back, is that a new dock or is that maintenance, et cetera? And so I'm thinking that there was a decision made maybe we just want a new dock, okay. And then the how you go about doing that needs to take into consideration where you are legally. And maybe you replace some at a time instead of replacing the whole thing and call it maintenance as opposed to replacement. Do you understand what I'm saying?
So I moved to Maitland in 2006, and I see this was built in 2006. About 2007, I was looking at, building a dock. And the lakes coordinator at the time kind of talked me through all the rules and regulations and what it would entail. So that tells me that there was somebody here that should have, back in that day, given a permit for this dock, because in 2007 I've talked to people about it. So Dan, shouldn't there not be that permit somewhere in the building?
It sounds like,
Yeah, if it was permitted, yes, it would be.
So you did, this was permitted?
I said if it was permitted.
yeah, so let's, I think we're putting him on the spot. I think the question you asked, which is a valid one, is, was this dock properly permitted back in 2006?
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily have the answer to that today. So instead of putting it on the spot, maybe this is a table this until you, if that's what you're thinking.
Do we have any particular concerns about that, this being appealed?
We have concerns about asking that the applicant, rather than forcing you to make a decision without all the information, will consent to taking to the next one. If that answer is no, I'm not going to tell you not to do it, but I'm going to tell you the applicant's wishes in that regard should matter, but they also should be listening to your concerns.
Right.
So I pulled up, our current owners purchased the property in 2022, so they would not have any direct information about this. And the prior owners to that purchased it in 2016. So we're looking back to the original owner. The house was built in 2001. So we're looking back to the original owner of the property. So we're not going to get any testimony from the current owners to be able to give us.
And I will say 2001 would have been before we did the document, the waterfront. The 2006, no, but 2001 would have been.
Right.
And we may not have that permitting information because residential permitting requirements are only to keep those permits for 15 years, so the record might not exist. We can certainly look, but the record might not exist.
So we have the opportunity here to table this, but we don't have, I'm not sure if the applicant is here or has authorized you to make that determination for them on this. So we don't, but if we don't have the applicant in front of us to consent to the postponement, is that what does it mean?
I thought this young lady was the representative of the applicant.
She was, to some degree, I'm not sure she has the authority to.
We asked for the permit. We asked for, and we
Can you come to the podium just so you can be heard?
Sorry. Let's step on toes. We asked for a copy of the old permit, and it couldn't be found. So it's too old. The records are too old. And it's 2 property owners ago.
Okay. Dan, does that sound correct from your position?
I'm sorry, I wasn't talking in.
The applicant's representative said that they asked for the permit. I guess, when you say you asked for the permit, did you ask from the homeowners or from the
Maitland?
Maitland. And so Maitland was unable to locate that?
That's very possible, as Mark said, that we usually don't keep the records more than 10 to 15 years.
Okay. So probably very little point plus one of these.
Right. Yeah.
So that's a fact that we don't have. Personally, I'm in agreement with, I think, everything that Councilperson Wurzel had to say. And the two, I mean, the issues here are, to me, are environmental protection and neighbors. And environmental protection, I think, it's negligent, I think, or not negligent, negligible, to, cut it back another couple of feet. I don't think that the lake is going to improve or suffer from any kind of, scaling down of this size of the dock. And the neighbors, the only ox to be gored here really is the neighbors and their view, looking at the aerial here. And, that's the way it is always with the boat docks. I mean, it's the only thing that really, aside from the environmental issue and perhaps any safety issues of navigation, which I don't think that they're not coming into play here, does it obstruct the neighbor's view of the lake? Does it obstruct their, and they bought into that position, and apparently both of them have agreed that they're fine with the dock being either reconstructed or repaired in its position. So I don't have a problem with this one, and I think the factual difference between this one and the next one. This one does not cause me heartburn to grant the waiver.
I mean, I was going to say that for this, although it's an excellent question regarding the legality of the original one, in this one it wouldn't make a difference for me. I think it would only make a difference if your rationale for approval was that it was in the same footprint of the other one and that one had been lawfully allowed, and therefore, it would matter. To me, even if they were extending it by a foot from the original footprint, given the information I have in this situation, it wouldn't matter to me, and I would still be inclined to support this particular one, given what I know. And so that's why it wouldn't particularly matter to me if we couldn't get that information.
Would anybody be entertaining well, I guess that's a different conversation.
Okay. Anybody else have any comment on this? Adam? Does anybody have a motion?
I will move to reverse the decision of the reviewing staff and to grant the request for appeal of 140 Minnehaha Circle waterfront structure permit.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? I've already handed over my gavel because I have to leave early. So without a gavel in my hand, I'm allowed to second this. So I'll second it for the purposes of any further discussion or vote. So we have a motion in a second. Mary, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Anderson?
Aye.
Councilmember Miles?
Aye.
Councilmember Duffy?
Before I give my vote, I would just like to say that I would like, and I hope the others on council would agree, that maybe this needs to come back to be looked at by planning and zoning, and to Councilperson Wurzel's discussion, see if there is some criteria of what can be done, and within that 100-foot approval and other things, because this is not the first time that something like this has come to us. I think even Mr. Walsh over here on Sibilia had the same problem with his neighbor and gave some permission. But that being said, because I am on the rule, I'm not really the rules guy, but I think that, once you open a door, then you're kind of saying, all right, you did it for this one, why am I not getting that? So with that being said, even though I'd like to see this be changed, I'm going to say nay.
Councilmember Hawkinson?
Solidarity with fans, nay.
Aye. So does that mean the waiver is granted?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. And I apologize, but I have to step out. We're in capable hands for the next portion of the meeting with Vice Mayor Guthrie.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay. All right, we're still on decisions. Decision number 3, request for appeal of 121 Whitecap Circle waterfront structure permit. Do we have the applicant here? That's familiar. Yeah, would you, Dan? Sorry.
I'll make this very quick. This is it's a pretty similar situation. This dock was actually constructed in 2001. Applicants desires to replace it in the same footprint. It does not meet the current length requirement. We have a 50-foot maximum length. It's actually 56.3 feet out. So they are appealing staff's decision in accordance with section 2.53. This one is on Lake Maitland, and similar to the last one, it's really not out of character with the area. There has been no objections with the letters that were sent out, and again, this is at the discretion of council's decision. Happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have questions for Dan?
So on this one, Dan, are they replacing all the pilings as well?
It's my understanding they're not.
Complete reconstruction. Okay. And can they bring it, unlike the other one where it didn't seem like it was a fixable solution, can they bring this back? Could you shorten this to bring it into compliance?
I'm sure they could. They haven't applied for any permits yet. Their first step was to appeal staff's decision, so I haven't seen any design or any permits of what can happen next.
Anybody else have a question for Dan before we go to the public? Okay. Let's open it up to the public, if anybody would like to. Just please, again, I know it's again, but if you would, you mind just
Yeah,
stating the name
Sheila
and
Sickler,
address.
Streamline Permitting. I represent the property owner and the builder, and we have notarized letters of no objection from both of the adjacent property owners. We just didn't get it into the packet for by the time Melissa distributed them, but I have a copy to leave with you. The dock is not going to all be replaced. The pilings are fine. They're just replacing all the framing, the decking, and the roof. That's why it's going to be pretty hard to pull it back to shore. And if you notice this blue line, that's the edge of the water. You see how far it is between the edge of water and the normal high? There's just a lot of land, there's a lot of area between where the water's edge actually is and the normal high. So a big section of this dock, if you didn't know exactly where the normal high water elevation was, you would think it was up on land. That's why it's 56 feet from normal high instead of 50. And there really isn't, like the variance criteria is can you ask for less, is it a hardship, all that stuff. We can't ask for less because we're trying to leave the pilings where they are and just replace all the framing and decking and the roof. And again, the neighbors are okay with it. It's just that 50% replacement rule that we're fighting with because they replace the roof this year, and then maybe they could reapply next year and replace the decking and framing. But we're just trying to get it all done at once.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You want me to give these copy these letters?
This goes to Mary right there. Okay. Any thoughts from council? Oh, I'm sorry. Anybody else for public?
Yeah. Mr. Vice Mayor, Dale McDonald, 108 Angela Court, so we just changed our code tonight. So a 6-foot side setback for docks, and we're just changing it again for 50 feet here. Daryl, I don't believe our code was intended to be interpreted, and Cliff, say you agree or not, for someone's specific desires. These are put into place for a reason. They have worked well for a very long time. And as we continue to want to customize our code, our land development code, Dan, for this specific person, this isn't about painting something purple with pink polka dots. This is what somebody's personal preferences are. We either have codes or we don't. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else before we close the public hearing? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to council. Discussion with council?
I have one more quick question. Is there any restriction in terms of like a successive applications, like a waiting period to come back if we wanted different information or something like that?
Actually, it depends. No, the answer is there is, but there is a specific provision of the code, and I was looking at it, that said that under certain circumstances you can come back in without waiting that length of period of time. I don't know if Dan remembers what I'm talking about. But there is a provision. I'd have to look it up again to see whether it applies to the circumstances. You're going to give me a minute, I will. But ordinarily there's a waiting period. This may or may not fall into the category where the waiting period would apply. Because under certain circumstances, you can come back without waiting.
Generally does apply to rezonings and applications like that where you can, it's usually a 1-year waiting period, but you can deny without prejudice and then come back within the year. In this case, I don't think it applies for appeals to permit.
So Dan, even they did that, they did the roof, right? And then they come back and like, all right, now we want to do all the supports and the decking. Now you've done 25% this time and 30% the next. So does that still pass, or is that still 55%?
In the old code it passed, in the new code it does not. You can't do it progressive. I think there's like a 3-year cumulative, you can't do more than 50% within, I think it's 3 years. Old code you could do 10%, like in fences you could do 10% a year. It could take you 6 years to redo your fence, or 9 years or whatever it takes. But in the new code there's a progressive, or a cumulative, I believe it's a 3-year period.
Thank you.
So I had intimated that I felt this one was different, and so a couple of things. One, I didn't have none of us had an opportunity previously to review whatever from the neighbors, but I find the neighbors' positions to be less persuasive in the situation where we're talking about how far the deck goes into the water as opposed to the last one. The last one, my position is I was finding that there was a hardship presented by the evidence that we had. I don't see that here. I understand that there's a representation being made of storm damage. I don't have enough, from my perspective, evidence of that to find hardship. And based on everything that we've heard on this one, I just don't hear enough to establish like a hardship. And I think that the purpose of the setback in the horizontal direction is different than the vertical direction into the water. And so those are my thoughts on this one.
Thank you. Ms. Hall Harris? Anything?
So what's weird is I'm actually more okay with this one because you're going into the body of water, whereas the encroachment on the adjacent neighbors to me presents more of a frustration. Because those neighbors could move and all of a sudden now, these existing neighbors signed off saying, sure, it's not a problem to me that you're encroaching on my setback, but the next neighbor says, whoa, hold on. I don't know why this dock needs to be bigger other than the representations made, which is it needs to be bigger. It does concern me, obviously, that we would be creating another variance, setting another precedent. That all concerns me, but from that standpoint, not the extension into the lake versus the lake. So, yeah, I'm listening with the persuasive arguments.
Well, and to that point, I think the difference between the width versus length to me in that sense was more just how persuasive the neighbors' opinions were. And I agree with the transferability of that. In terms of hardship to these people, I understood more from my life experience how the width of a dock within feet of what we were talking about in scale would affect your enjoyment of that dock. The length, I think agreeing with Ms. Hall Harrison here that I don't see, in terms of creating a hardship, which is really all I have to go on here in terms of our criteria, I don't see, I mean, I can see that, I mean, I like it, clearly, because that's what they're asking for, but aside from that, I don't.
I might be able to provide some, at least something that would grab your attention. What I did not mention about the right angle dock, but is built into the code, is at that time, we were working under not a code, but a memo from the then city manager, whose name I'll leave out because it's irrelevant, that said that on a body of water which was controlled by the city, because we owned the lake bottom on that specific lake because of the man-made harbor from I-4 at Lake Jackson, that we would allow people to build docks up to 40 feet out in the water. And so they came in, asked to build, they were allowed to go out 40 feet, which created this problem. At the end of the court case, both at trial and then sustained on appeal, the court said, no, you have to go back on within your property limit because the lake bottom was our property. And so they had to build back in an area which was only maybe 10 to 15 feet out of the water, but because it was a borrowed pit, it's super deep. It drops off like this, so they could literally get a boat and still get in the water and have a dock that's 20 feet long or less. The reason that's relevant here is because when we then came to structure the code to try to avoid the situation in the past, that from repeating itself, it uses this language, which is not quoted up there, but I think it will help make this point. It says, in no event shall a dock exceed a distance of 50 feet into the lake, measured from the lake elevation of the in no event. So in other words, it was a super strong expression of intent, and part of the reason for that is if you go through this whole thing, it talks about interfering with navigability and repairing the littoral rights and so forth, and arguably, the further out you go on the lake, depending on jet skiers and boaters and blah, 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 the more you might interfere with those things. So if this is what your code says, I'm not advocating it, but I'm just making sure it's in, you guys are aware of what the code says.
So what I hear you distinguishing is the language, and I'm looking at it, between in no event shall a boat dock exceed a distance of 50 feet into the lake, as compared to what we were looking at in the last example, which is the subsection right before that, which says there is a minimum side setback of 10 feet.
Correct. It's a different kind of expression of intent.
Sure.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Cliff. Councilman Wild, anything?
I don't really want to draw similarities or differences because I think they're different. Yeah, these are different, and there's I think the issue I had on the last one and why I thought was relevant about the permits is that I look back on aerials and it looked to me from 2001 all the way, it seemed to have the same footprint, and even when they did the 2006, looks like they put a roof on it, it kept the same dimensions. And so if you're keeping the same footprint and someone buys a house and says, I think I bought this, and there's nothing in a zoning verification or anything that would give you reason to believe that you were violating the setback, it's kind of hard to tell somebody you can't fix what you've got. That was my reasoning on asking when the permits were issued and what it looked like. And so like I said, I looked at the property appraiser aerials and it looked like the footprint was the same. So on this one, I kind of have the same concerns as to say, if you don't know, you don't. If there's nothing that can tell you violated, I struggle with saying that you can't rebuild it. I don't know. That's just my concerns that if you. And Dan, if someone came in and said, "Does this violate?" I guess they could. Would they be able to find out before they even tried to pull a permit to renovate it?
Yeah, well, assuming the permit is on record, it hasn't been destroyed. If they did a zoning verification letter, which isn't very common for single-family residential, but yes, that or a title search, a lien search would find all that stuff out.
Title search would say what?
Or a title search or a lien search of anything that's been permitted or not permitted.
Right. But we're saying we don't know.
Correct.
That was my struggle with the first one.
Dan, I have a question. Do we know at all, did the normal high water elevation ever change on this lake? Is it still like 62.5 feet or whatever the number is? I mean, consistent probably to 2001. I'm just thinking about that. Maybe is that something that changed?
I'm hearing no.
But you would still be 56. You still have 53 feet. So, which doesn't. Okay. Thank you. All right. All right. Any last questions? Or we look for a motion? So everything being said and done, would anybody like to make a motion on this? Okay.
Does it?
I'll make one. I was just waiting to see if anyone felt more called to do so.
Oh.
This is one where the way we word our motion matters, but I'll make a motion to affirm the decision of the reviewing staff and deny the request for appeal of 121 Whitecap Circle waterfront structure permit.
All right. We got a motion. Do we have a second?
I will second for the purpose of discussion.
Okay. We have a second, so we'll open up for discussion with the council.
Cliff, would you please reread for me the language specific to this?
On the length?
Yes.
Sure. This comes under subsection 4A, and it says the structure length does not unreasonably interfere with the riparian or littoral rights. This is what's supposed to be considered in granting a permit of other persons and property, including but not limited to navigation, lake access, and safety issues. In no event shall a boat dock exceed a distance of 50 feet into the lake, measured from the lake elevation identified in table 5.3.7 D2, normal high water elevations, unless otherwise approved by City Council as a part of the planned development or development agreement. That's the entire section.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. We had a motion and a second. So, Mary, would you mind calling the roll?
Does it matter? Does it matter for purposes of reviewing this at all whether or not you're actually changing? I mean, the 50% rule. Does it matter to us that its pilings are staying the same? I just don't know what the.
To me, no. It sounds like we all have different positions on that, though. From what I'm hearing.
I'm not sure. I do think, to Vance's point, I do think some of this has to get looked at because it seems like we're.
Cliff is saying that, and that this would be consistent with my real world experience, that ours is rather liberal in that, or consistent with or more liberal than other places he's familiar with in terms of the 50%. I believe that's why when I drive by, the villas in Winter Park, there's like someone's leaving like a structure while they knock the rest of it down because of these types of rules
Yes.
that allow you to do that.
They learn to use maintenance liberally as opposed to, let's start over.
So, otherwise, does that encourage people to just leave stuff for forever that's dilapidated and broken?
That's why.
Right, so that I don't have to abide by the rules. So, to me, that doesn't make a difference just because I think that that's our rule and that part's clear. The stuff that made a difference to me that I thought might deserve to be revisited is like criteria or very, clarity, both for our purposes and for the people applying for appeal, I think in fairness, to understand what they should bring to us. But to me, that's more what it is, and that's why Cliff is being helpful to me, giving me something to grab onto.
I'm with you on that because I think that discretion is great, but discretion without any kind of boundary is tough. It puts because if the only criteria is they're going to put back what's there and they're just fixing it up.
Well,
I have a hard time saying that that's not a.
But that's not exactly what the criterion is. If you forget about the build back for a minute, and I know that's kind of the whole issue, but if you're the permitting department Here's what the permit review standards are. That's at section 4. An application for waterfront structure permit shall be approved only on a finding there is confidence and substantial evidence in the record that standards listed in subsections A and B below are met. And then A is the minimum setbacks, then the absolute, in no event more than 50 feet language and all that stuff. So it's the applicant's burden to bring that forth. What is been brought forth instead is, well, we want to do 56 feet. Okay, that's more than 50. Is there a reason? Is there a hardship? And I understand, if I get it right, that the reason is because that's what it used to be. Is that essentially the reason?
It's my understanding they want to
So
build
the
it.
question is that good enough? And if it is, okay, grant the appeal. It's up to you guys.
No, I hear it. It's just, we're without guide rails, and it makes it.
But we've gotten a whole interesting exercise in legislative intent.
There you go.
And that.
I guess,
Older than dirt.
right, I guess in no event is difficult.
And we have some guidance as to why that is as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more discussion from council? Ready to call the vote? Mary?
Councilmember Wiley.
All right.
Councilmember Wilkerson.
Aye.
Councilmember Whittle.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Guthrie.
Aye. Okay. Thank you much. Thank you. All right, decisions are done for the night. And we have a discussion piece that Councilperson Wurzel wants to discuss on Resolution 21-215, ceremonial opening, invocation, and the reciting of the Pledge of Allegiance. So, Ms. Councilmember Wurzel.
So this came to my attention, or this resolution, to where I read it, actually in the process of talking to Ms. Hollingsworth, our clerk, who couldn't be here tonight, but for purposes of her evaluation, when we just kind of recently did that, and so I was talking to her about her job. And one of the things we discussed a lot that that we're kindred spirits on is her clear initiative or desire to ensure that as much as possible our policies, our procedures are clear, consistent, and that we're able to follow them consistently, and where we do not, that we either get a new policy or modify or change it so that we can do that. And I think that there's efficiency in that. And then from my perspective, and kind of similar to some of the things that we were just going through in a different way, I feel like that having clear and consistent policies that we can follow in reality helps to ensure that we're treating all residents fairly and equally, just because we want to, and to avoid trouble and all that. So in that spirit, one of the things that she brought to my attention was this particular resolution. And the reason why the clerk brought this to my attention in those conversations is because if you've had the chance to read over the resolution, which was attached, it puts it puts a lot of the onus or an affirmative responsibility for enacting this ordinance on the city clerk. And so that was the impetus for that conversation. And so when I started reading it, a little bit with the feedback of Ms. Hollingsworth as to what this looks like in reality in terms of the parts that she's responsible for or that any clerk would be responsible for, and a little bit just based on what I know does and doesn't happen from sitting here, I had concerns about us not following this, basically. And some examples from that are, the language in here in two places at least, says that these things shall occur. So the invocation shall occur at each meeting, which it didn't today, for example. It does allow later for the mayor to, in certain circumstances, do a moment of silence, which is what we did today and what we do the vast majority of the time I've been here. But the way I read this, it's supposed to be incumbent on if we do all of the other things or all of the other steps are taken, and then there's no one here, that then the mayor can do that. So my concern is not that I think that Ms. Hollingsworth or anyone else should be doing more. I think that from reading this, that it puts an unreasonable burden. And in some places, I don't even know that it would be possible for her to do some of these things. And so part of an example, and the intent is very clear in this one, the legislative intent, is to promote diversity of viewpoints, for example. And so because of that, there is a responsibility to encourage in multiple ways, through multiple mechanisms, a diversity of viewpoints. It also requires that those people or organizations be in the city of Maitland. The city of Maitland, as we all know, is pretty small, and Ms. Hollingsworth has exhaustively looked through all of the possible organizations that would fit this criteria or criterion here, and there's just not, it's not the way we imagined it, or it was imagined, I believe, in terms of all faiths and people coming together. It's not really possible given the way that this is drafted. It also requires the city clerk to have a database and send out invitations once a year, and just all of these sort of different things that, again, is onerous. It does allow individuals and organizations to reach out to the city on their own without the city clerk or anyone inviting them. And I've inquired of staff regarding how, and the clerk, how often that happens, and the answer is it doesn't. And in fact, the only organization, and not individual, but an organization that has done the invocation since I've been here is the Free Thought Society. My understanding, again from Ms. Hollingsworth, is they recently said they no longer wish to do that, in part because it's antithetical to their principles to be the only ones doing an invocation. And so, all of those things being said, right. I also spoke with Cliff because he was the one who drafted this, and that at the time, as one might imagine, the reason it has all of these mechanisms and onerous sort of things is to keep it constitutional, or to keep it as close as we can get. You know, how Cliff will say this is the best I can do to protect you from those who wander, and they sure do. And these are the types of things that are ripe for random people to want to challenge and play with. And that's another concern of mine, to ensure that realistically these are the types of things, even in a small town, that people can challenge if they feel that we're not following our rules and laws. And so that is why I wanted to bring it up, because I don't know that everyone, myself included, until it came to my attention, would have been aware of what this actually says and what is actually happening and what actually could happen. I don't think that it sounds like it sounds like the reasonable alternative, and I'll allow Cliff to correct me wherever, if there was one, would be to word it differently to more favor the moment of silence, to kind of make it more reflect what we actually are doing essentially every time. I'm sure that there could be things in there, I don't know, but in terms of if people wanted to do something different, I don't know. But in terms of the actual language, it's not my intent to bring it up for discussion to in any sort of attach to sort of some sort of principle, or to say that we shouldn't have anything or whatever, but just that what we have, it sounds like it's important.
Any discussion on
I can make a database from the yellow pages to
I
ask
mean,
each
that in
person.
and of itself is one thing that has always perturbed me about this, even as far back as we've talked about it before, is the, maintenance of a database and the really onerous level of requirement. I mean, I'm sure that, Mary and Lori really literally have better things to do with their time than to maintain a database of people who have to be siphoned through in order to come and speak. But I do also share Lori's concern about the constitutionality and that we are just one person who decides that they don't have enough to do with their time to come and challenge us on wanting to speak on behalf of some group, and all of a sudden we are now in a constitutional battle and, you know, paying Cliff's legal bills to go and, which is really not bad for you, but for us, you know, I think our taxpayers and our residents have better uses for our money. Cliff, what are you seeing out there in the big bad world?
I have examples for all manner of things, so I will go through them. Option one, the option that I favor, the absolute most, is currently in use and has been for as long as I can remember, which is quite a while now, 2007 anyway, in Ponce Inlet, where they simply do a pledge and get right into business. And they do that not because they're all sacrilegious, but they're all retirees and they really don't want to spend a lot of time sitting there in this meeting. And they don't want to go through this whole process. Ponce Inlet is as you know, an inlet community that has one road in, one road out. And they don't have, I'm not even sure they have a single church in their jurisdiction. And that would mean inviting people from all over Volusia County, which tends to skew a certain political way, and Ponce doesn't necessarily skew that way. And so they just go straight to business. And that's easy because that takes the whole constitutionality of an invocation out of the question. On the other side, the city that I recently have been restored to, as city attorney told me previously, when I went through the same issue with them, that, well, it's just a fill in the blank name of the city thing, that we have to do a prayer. And, you know, it became a big thing when I said, I don't recommend it. I recommend if you're going to do something, do it with silence. Otherwise, you're going to have to do all this stuff. And that's because we were looking literally at the Supreme Court opinion at the time and trying to figure out what would pass muster. Because the Supreme Court, much to people's surprise, it said, oh, you can absolutely have a Christian prayer, because the big issue that a lot of city lawyers had always talked about was you just can't pray to Jesus. So you could, you know, say God, and you could do a lot of other things, but if you said Jesus, that was Christianity, so therefore that was a no-go. Well, the Supreme Court said, no, you can absolutely do it, but as long as you allow someone to pray to Satan too. Or have the free thought people that pray to nobody and say, use your common sense, folks, that's what we elect you for, and so on, and so on, and so on. Indeed, there was a guy famously in Lake County whose legal name is the Minions of Satan. And he went to Lake County and said, if you're going to keep doing this, then I'm going to be the one at your podium. And so, I think you remember that, Mark. I think that happened when you were out there. So, at any rate, those are the issues. And so, in order to defend prayer, if you're going to do it, you have to affirmatively not make it just Christian prayer. You have to affirmatively take efforts and can defend the efforts you've made to provide for the opportunity of all these other speakers. Now, that doesn't mean you have to fly somebody in, but that's why the outreach is important, so that if you're challenged later, you can say, hey, we sent these many letters, we sent this many emails, here's the letter we got, I saw it from the free thought people that said, now that we can do it, we're not interested in doing it. And so, you know, that's how it went. But that came a couple times, 2 or 3 times here, and it was, I mean, it's not a big deal. But that's why you make the effort, so that later on, if you do have to defend it, you can say, yeah, here's all the times we've reached out to people. And so that leaves kind of the third thing, which is the moment of silence thing, which is what we have been doing recently, because that is provided for in the current policy. But you can make it where the policy is just a moment of silence, or you can make it where we go straight to the pledge and get down to business. And towards that end, and I say this mainly because of my experience in that other city that I won't name, one of the things that got argued at the time by the folks who make a living literally coming to you and tell you all the reasons why you should have Christian prayer, not just prayer, but Christian prayer in your meetings, is that they have been to the Supreme Court and they literally challenged me in a public meeting and said, how many times have you been to the Supreme Court on something like this? And I said, I hope I never go, because that means I'm spending a lot of money on something that could be avoided by simply not doing it. But the other thing that is always unique, and you'll note that I keep this on my phone, it's because I have to go through this debate regularly, okay? And so for those who are uneducated about the Lord's Prayer, there's an intro to the Lord's Prayer, and you can find it in literally every version of the Bible. And it says as follows: when ye pray, ye shall not be as the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues, and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, they have received their reward. And it goes on to talk about how if you're going to pray in your closet. Because God knows what you want before you ask. So for those advocates for public prayer, there's your, and you're a Bible-believing Christian, there's your answer. Because that's the intro to that. And when you go in your closet and pray in quiet, this is how you do it. Our Father who art in heaven. So FYI.
And just like for anyone, obviously our ordinance is public, but also just for benefit of what I'm looking at, the city clerk shall compile and maintain a database of the religious congregations and other groups and organizations with an established presence, which is very vague.
Right, it could be the NRA.
Could be the PTA. The database shall be compiled, examining a broad and diverse pool of religious leaders and other representatives, and it gives examples of ministers, priests, chaplains, rabbis, deacons, clerics. So, for example, I don't believe we have a synagogue. We don't have I don't think we have. I'm not aware of a mosque, for example, it's using clerics and things like that. So, first of all, it'll be a little bit difficult. Although I guess if you were reaching out to all of the ones there were, there's tension there in terms of the intent and how hard did you look, I guess. If it's the city of Orlando, it might be easier to do something like that in terms of at least fitting that criteria. And then it also goes on to say that it must be done using the yellow pages or the internet. It does nod to the century in that manner. And so on and so forth. It has to be updated annually, and then also on or about December 1st, the city clerk shall, not optional, mail an invitation to potential invocation speakers included in the database, and so on and so forth. So there's multiple tasks that are incumbent upon the city clerk in there. So that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and then it talks about they have to be mailed out and you have to be lined up for 12 months and how many times you can speak. I'm 100% certain that really this is beyond the scope of what we should be asking our clerk to be responsible for. And so I think that at minimum, for the constitutionality and for the amazing amount of burden that this actually places on our clerk, especially if we do have a resident or a non-resident who comes forward and actually complains that the clerk is not abiding by the rules of the ordinance itself, we could actually.
I think more likely what it would be is that we would have to be very generous with any requests that come.
Correct, because they're all of a sudden, oh, well, you're not preferring me, or, I didn't get a chance, nobody asked me. I would like to see us move on from this language, and I think, honestly, it would be great if we just did the pledge and got straight down to business, because otherwise we can't debate vote docs all evening long.
Well, and that was my hope from discussion, I'm sorry, just to frame, is that we would identify one of sort of three-ish options, which is ask Cliff to write a proposed ordinance about going straight to the pledge, ask Cliff to write one that includes a moment of silence that sort of more reflects what we're doing currently in general, or say, I don't want Cliff to spend his time doing any of that because it's fine as it is. I mean, that was sort of my idea, so that we didn't ask Cliff to do 12 different versions. Again, because he doesn't like to fill hours.
Oh, I hate it.
I think we're taking the database word potentially a little too literal, because I'm assuming that all you do is just have a record of some form.
Have a list.
Have a list.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think that the emphasis on some of these terminology, I think, is maybe pushing this into making it seem a little more onerous than I think it actually is. I think that having opportunities for the public to speak in a ceremonial manner is a good thing. I think the idea that we're going to prevent somebody who wants to come, they can just get up in the public period and they get 3 minutes anyway. So it's not like we're going to prevent somebody who wants to come in here and say something because we've got a public period opportunity to do that. If someone's going to be malicious and take advantage of an opening moment to try to do something, I mean, I guess we could deal with that if that ever came about. And I think what we're all trying to say is let's prevent it before it becomes an issue. But do you make a rule to prevent the potential bad actor when you would eliminate the potential for someone who maybe is coming in, to be any organization who wants to be recognized and know they have a presence in the community? I don't know that you design a rule to prevent the bad actor when the bad actor hasn't acted and you were going to potentially negate what could be a positive for the community. But that's just my...
Well, and I completely hear you, and I agree with what you're saying, and I think that you're absolutely right that we want to still spotlight those opportunities, but we have done that in the past through either having the mayor do a resolution or having some sort of a, that the Hindu group who came and gave us the votes. That was some sort of a day of recognition of their efforts, right? So that didn't come during an invocation, that came as a recognition of their ceremonial and heritage event that they were doing. So we have mechanisms in place for, kids who want to come and speak. We have that for groups who want to come and be recognized, who want to make a presentation or want to make a speech. We already have that. I think what we're doing is we're just carving out the bully pulpit, which creates a constitutional issue for us, and also does, if Lori, the clerk, is saying that it is extra work for her, we have to believe her. And also, on the other side, it's not like we have people banging down the door to actually come and do these presentations. So I think, it doesn't, it's not benefiting us, is what I'm saying.
The onerous like task, that's only really coming up because Cliff's explaining why, or in terms of the possibility of someone, that sort of idea, that's coming up because Cliff's explaining why it's drafted the way it's drafted. Mm-hmm. My reason for bringing it up was actually because the clerk does not believe, and some other members of staff who are involved in this do not believe that I'm making too big of a deal and kind of exaggerating how onerous these tasks are. As Cliff said, the key from his legal guidance is the outreach part. So it's not just making it available to anyone who wants to come. It's actually affirmatively, it puts an affirmative responsibility, and that is key from his perspective and why it was drafted this way, to do the outreach. That is actually really important to how this is drafted. And that is, again, that's how it came to my attention. If it was just about the constitutionality, I would have brought this up the first day I sat up here, frankly. But it was really brought to my attention. And this time, and we talk so much about understaffing and efficiency to make sure that our staff is not doing things that they don't need to be doing that are not adding value to this city. I don't see when an employee is telling me in their evaluation, the only one I did, that this is something that is adding anxiety, and not only work, but anxiety about the ability to fulfill the terms of it, because she's a very hard worker, as we all know, then I feel, what is it adding? And it seems, in the year plus I've been sitting in here, I think maybe 5 times I've seen that occur, and it was 2 names, or, then what is it for? Why are we putting this much task and say, okay, city clerk, spend 20 hours, a month doing that? If you read it, she's following it. For what? Just so we can say that we did?
I'd like to know. If it's 20 hours a month, then I think we've got a point. But I read this and I can't see that it's going to take 20 hours in a year. But I don't know. I didn't talk to her about this. This is not something that's I'm speaking. And you've said, I agree that of late we haven't done this. I think in the past it's happened more frequently, and I think it has to do with outreach of all of us. If you want people to come in and talk, to give people the opportunity. I think with all these things, they're how you look at it. I think whether it's a moment of silence or when someone comes in and talks about some perspective on this, to me, it's setting a perspective that you're making decisions for the city as a whole and maybe granting a broader perspective. At least that's what it means to me. I think it probably means something to everybody else, but I don't. This is not one that I would have put. And again, I get it. It's if it came up with your conversations with staff and it was important to them, then I get it. This is not one to me that I would have said was broken to a point we would need to fix it.
I spoke with multiple members of staff who feel this.
Yeah,
Not true.
So I would not. This would not be one that I would ask Cliff to redraft.
Is this something we could just, with council, just look at and kind of streamline, what things are being asked? I mean, I think you said something about having to mail out invitations. I mean, and just make it email. I mean, you hit one button and it all goes out. You don't have to stamp them. You can put it in envelopes and I think we could probably make this easier, but I agree with Councilman Maitland. I've always appreciated it. I'm sitting here just thinking of all the people I've seen up there and who've done it. I mean, I've even seen council people, go do it. So they got up out of their chair and have done it. So I kind of appreciate, the part of it. And I think how we've done it is if there isn't anybody, do the moment of silence.
Right, again, I'm focused on what is requiring, and I take objection to any sort of comments from the peanut gallery that are alleging that it's not correct. It is correct and true, and I sit here and say that it is correct and true, that I've spoken with multiple members of the staff, including the people in the office that are required to do these things. Everyone else sitting up here has not apparently had those conversations, and I understand why, because we're not allowed to talk about this together, and so no one knew why I put this on there or whatever, because I couldn't tell you. So I understand why you haven't, and none of us have to do these tasks, which is why I didn't know that they existed before. But that is the issue. So if each person, and unfortunately Ms. Hollingsworth had a family emergency and wasn't able to be here to speak to that, although I know Mr. Regaton has had some of those conversations with her as well. But if the idea is that it's worth it, that we want her to have to do these things and to devote that time, and it is worth it to you, then that is your position. But I would like us to focus on what that issue is, and not whether we like it or we think it's a great idea or it's fun or it's sweet. It's whether or not it's worth the time that we pay our city clerk to invest in that task and those tasks. And it is not an option, from my perspective or the law's perspective, to ignore those tasks and to say she doesn't really have to do them.
I'm not sure if that's what you interpreted. I said I was questioning how onerous the tasks were, but I also prefaced it by saying that I have not had the conversation.
No, I was referring to the peanut gallery.
Okay, yeah. So I don't, if it's truly an onerous task, like you said, and it's taking 20 hours a month, then I think that seems like that's a big lift. The question is what elements of this aren't taking her that long?
That was facetious.
Yeah. So I mean, I do think, is there a time spent? Is there a quantity of time that staff would spend on this task that I think is worth it? In my personal opinion, the answer is yes. Mm-hmm. If it's truly something that staff says this seems we're putting so much effort into this, I think then the one question would be, could we make that more efficient? And if the answer is no, then I think we would revisit it. But I don't, like I said, I think the opportunity for people, and again, I think your experience is maybe different than mine, because when I've had it, various people have come in and done it that I wouldn't have met but for the fact that they came in and gave speeches, and then I see them out in public and we have conversations about what the organization does or their connection to Maitland. And so that's been meaningful to me just because of people who have come through here. But I get that your experience over the last year hasn't been that.
We've been sitting in the same place, but I mean, for the last 18 months, there's been two.
I'm not disagreeing with the
Yeah.
last 18 months, I'm just saying that for the, however many years I've been here, there have been a variety of people. talking
Yeah,
about it.
and me, I'm with him also, there has been a variety.
But the way that
But,
you're saying it is, I think is what I was hoping to accomplish, is
Yeah.
that to raise this issue so that each of you can speak with Lori, or perhaps, I don't know, if
Well,
it
that's
makes.
where I was gonna go. Let's do the ask first, and let's say, Lori, is there some way that we could stream this so it's faster and easier? Or what can we do to change this to make it easier to ask on you? Is there something that would help out? So that's what I would do. I'd do the ask first.
Would you like me to give you an idea?
Go for it.
Look at the words up there on that screen. Opening invocation. You are invoking something from that podium or that one to start your meeting, which is a government meeting. You're invoking speech. You're seeking it out, and implicitly, whether you believe this or not, endorsing it. And that's why, since government can't endorse specific speech, it has to open the doors to all speech. As long as it doesn't violate the offense, the personality, the kinds of things that are decorum related, that's why. But we have had, not only in this city, but in other cities, for things like organizations like Councilman Watt was talking about, presentations. We have a section in the meeting agenda, when there is one, for presentations. Like I guess with the Hindu folks that were here, or whatever, it could be the League of Women Voters. It could be somebody coming talking about a new tax deduction for seniors, et cetera, et cetera. We've had all of that stuff. But not as an invocation of the government, but as a presentation by an organization who requested it. We didn't seek them, they sought us. That's the difference.
So the good idea is, my thought, and I did talk to Mark about this today, is I'd like the way we've been doing it, leave it open. If somebody wants to come at that time, they can do an invocation. If not, we just do a moment of silence and then start the meeting.
It can't just be that though, because again, you call it an invocation. All of that procedure that is spelled out
Is there
there.
something we could change it to where it still is the time?
Open the meeting, and if you have somebody who wants to make a presentation about, oh, we're a new church in town, come see us, or here's what we believe, and here's why you think you'd make a good member, or whatever. I don't know that we've ever not had that, but an invocation has got a different kind of category, okay? It's a different thing, and it is typically, and has been here, almost always, with two exceptions, in my entire time here, been Christian prayer. And if that's all you have, you are going to have a problem. And the only way you avoid the problem is by showing the efforts you made for it not to just be Christian prayer.
So I think
that's why that thing's important.
the first step for everyone who hasn't might be, if you feel called to do so, to speak with Lori to find out, what exactly this looks like for her and all of that. If you don't feel after that conversation that there's any need to change anything, then that's your last step, I suppose, for you. But if you feel that there's steps that she suggests specifically to you, then the next question would be, are those things something that our lawyer would recommend taking out or whatever? But I think it's a tiered approach. Obviously, I think anyone knows bringing this particular issue, which I guess is kind of the point, that it can't be incendiary, but I wanted to frame it the way I did because it's truly, the idea is to focus on, is it causing undue burden on our city staff? And if so, then what do we do about it? But if the answer to that first question in your opinion is no, then fine, but that is something that I wanted us to all be able to kind of be aware of and do what you need to do to be able to feel that you can answer that first question, which is, do you believe that this is causing an undue burden on our staff? And once you know what that burden is, or you feel you appreciate it, then it becomes, is it worth it in your, I guess, opinion? So that's what I wanted to.
I'm surprised you're as passionate about this, because didn't you write it? So I'm trying to.
I wrote it
Under
in
duress.
order to keep you out of trouble, but I highly recommended you not do it.
Sometimes lawyers do what their clients want.
I said, if you're going to do anything, do a moment of silence. Better yet, go straight to the pledge. Then you don't have this issue. You can have all the presentations you want because you're not soliciting them. But if you solicit them, you got to solicit them from everywhere. That's the difference.
Right, and it's important to frame, I think the issue is not, can we ever allow any religious group to ever talk or talk about what they want? As Cliff's saying, like, we do that, and some of the references you guys are making to, we had a rabbi here, and since I've been here, talking about, I think, Day of Learning. We had the Hindu congregation here, and all of those things, and what we're talking about doesn't affect that at all. They go through a different procedure.
Yeah, it's a presentation.
But it's simply specific to this ordinance specifically, and not to the ability to discuss whatever the public wants to discuss in general. So, thank you.
Thanks. All right. Reports. Mr. City Attorney.
I have nothing, thank you.
Really, nothing going on in Big Tally.
Well, if you want to report on that, there's nothing good going on. Okay. I can just tell you, I sent out an email, I copied it to basically every city and government we represented regarding things that have to be on our website, as well as other things that have to be done to not only comply with, but to notify the development public of the availability of them coming in for affordable housing project and us not being able to say no. So that is, I've made sure that all of my cities are aware of it. Some were absolutely not, and some were in the process of coming in compliance now. In addition, the legislation that is now in place that I've been telling you about for 2 years, it just didn't make it through the first session, but it made it through this one, is the one where we can now be sued to stop an ordinance in tracks and it not be enforced until the court weighs in on whether it's a good ordinance or a bad ordinance. It also requires financial disclosure of the impacts. I literally just came back from FMAA this year. It was Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And they had a speaker on that topic, and whose best advice was, if you don't know how to put a financial impact, just put undetermined, which is insane, because that is going to be true about almost everything we do. How do you know the impact of an ordinance that says we are reducing the setbacks from 10 feet to 6? How do you know? How do you study that? Or you decide to take it, like when we changed the district here to say that we didn't want automobile dealers here in the future, new ones coming in here. What's the impact of saying, no, you can't come in? I don't know, but I'm not the guys at Tallahassee and gals up in Tallahassee with all that brilliance. I'm not smart enough, apparently, for that. But all I can tell you is there's no good news out of Tallahassee, and that remains the same.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager?
We have our budget workshop next Monday, 6 o'clock. Budget will be sent out to you, the draft budget will be sent out to you tomorrow, and will also be posted. Had the first set of library kickoff meetings for public input. They were very well attended, got a lot of good input. The architects are sort of digesting that and putting it together right now. As we talked about previously at City Council, and let those folks know there is an online process for people that couldn't make it out in terms of the mind-breaking session. So we're still taking input. That'll be up for the next week or two to get that. So anybody that wants to participate can. And next Tuesday at noon, we have the library and A&H workshop, so they can explain their budgets to you. I'm really hoping that we have a new mimeograph machine budgeted for the library. for those of us that remember the mimeograph. So hopefully that will be in there. So that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Mary? Council?
No.
You always have something good. Give it some wisdom,
No, but
closing it out.
I've just had so much good stuff today.
All right, with that being said, call this meeting closed.